Italian and Scottish researchers, mainly from the University of Pisa, conducted advanced high-frequency radar mapping under Egypt's famous pyramids. Something just moved beneath the Great Pyramid of Giza, and scientists don't know what it is. For thousands of years, the pyramid has stood in absolute silence, a monument of stone, precision, and mystery. Every chamber mapped, every tunnel explored, every theory exhausted, or so we thought. Because this time, the discovery didn't come from inside the pyramid. It came from beneath it. Using cutting-edge radar developed by researchers from the University of Pisa and teams in Scotland, scientists deployed a system so advanced it can detect microscopic vibrations in the Earth itself, movements far too subtle for human senses. The technology, known as synthetic aperture radar, Doppler tomography, was fed into AI systems trained to reconstruct what the human eye could never see. And what it revealed wasn't static. It was moving. Deep beneath the bedrock, far below the ancient stones, the AI detected a shifting energy pattern, something pulsing, changing, almost alive. Not a cavity, not a fault line, but a signal, one that defies everything we understand about the pyramid and the ground it stands on. Within hours, researchers began rechecking the data. Within days, information started to disappear. Before we fully expose what AI just uncovered, hit like and subscribe, because whatever is under the pyramid was never supposed to be found. Before artificial intelligence could work on the Great Pyramid of Giza, researchers first turned the entire structure into a three-dimensional block of data. For most of its life, the Great Pyramid looked like a single solid block of stone from the outside, with only a few cramped spaces inside that anyone could actually enter. Early explorers could reach the descending passage, the so-called Queen's Chamber, the Grand Gallery, the King's Chamber, and a rough underground room cut into the limestone below the base. And that was about it. No one could see what was going on inside the bulk of the masonry or in the rock under the pyramid without cutting into it, which was never going to happen. On a monument like this, that changed when a group of engineers and physicists decided to treat the pyramid like a giant structure that needed to be inspected the same way you might inspect a bridge or a reactor. In late 2015, Cairo University and a French group called the HIP Institute launched the Scan Pyramids project. Their plan was to cover the pyramid and the rock around it with modern scanners, collect as much data as possible without touching a single block, and turn all of that into one detailed three-dimensional model. To do that, they stacked several tools on top of each other. Cosmic ray moon imaging uses fast, tiny particles that fall from space and pass through stone to show where the stone is thick and where it is empty. Infrared thermal cameras watch how the blocks heat up and cool down to find spots where heat leaks differently from the rest of the face. Ground-penetrating radar sends short radio pulses into the stone and soil and listens for echoes. Ultrasound does something similar with sound waves instead of radio. Electrical resistivity tomography pushes a weak electric current through the rock and measures how easily it moves, which changes if there is the cavity or softer material. Each method alone gives a rough picture, but together they start to draw something much sharper. The most famous breakthrough came from the tiny particles from space. When cosmic rays hit the upper air, they create particles called muons that shoot down through everything below. Rock blocks some of them. Empty space lets more of them through. By counting how many muons arrive from each direction, you can work out whether you are looking through dense stone or a hollow. It is like using rain to sketch the shape of a roof by watching how many drops reach buckets on the floor. The first cavities detected by the scan pyramidmography were empty spaces behind the chevrons above the Great Pyramid entrance. Scan Pyramids teams put 3 different types of moon detectors in and around the Great Pyramid. Each setup looks at the pyramid from a different angle, but counts the same rain of moons. After months of measuring, the results showed something no one expected. Above the long, steep Grand Gallery, where blocks were supposed to be tightly packed, The muon counts suddenly looked more like counts through open space than solid stone. All three detector systems saw the same thing from different directions. A large empty region, with a length of at least about 100 feet, and a cross-section similar to the Grand Gallery itself. The team called it the Scan Pyramid's Big Void. It was the first major internal structure discovered in the Great Pyramid since the 19th century, and it was found without moving a single stone. The moon maps also showed an odd, low-density spot above the original entrance on the north face behind a set of big chevron-shaped blocks. That hint later became known as the North Face Corridor, a corridor-like space running behind those chevrons near the outside of the pyramid. What makes this kind of work different from older surveys is the amount of data involved. Modern moon imaging does not give a single flat picture. It fills a three-dimensional grid of tiny blocks inside and around the pyramid. One recent muon study of Khufu's pyramid used a grid of about 8 million of these tiny three-dimensional cells, often called voxels, each one holding the estimated density at that point. Every muon that hits a detector is traced back along a straight line through those cells, and the computer updates the counts along that line. Over time, the system records billions of such paths. No human can look at that many numbers by hand and see where the voids and solid lines are. That is where heavy data processing starts to matter. Programs have to clean away noise, search for streaks of slightly lower density that might mean a corridor, and test different internal layouts until the simulated muon counts match the real ones as closely as possible. Researchers now use machine learning methods to sharpen those images and to pull out hidden anomalies that did not match the old design plans. While the muon teams were busy with the inside, another set of groups watched the outer skin of the pyramid. In late 2015, Scan Pyramids teams ran an infrared thermal survey of several pyramids, including Khufu's. They scanned the faces at sunrise as the stone warmed up and at sunset as it cooled down. On the eastern face of the Great Pyramid, they found 3 stones in the lowest row that stayed noticeably warmer than the surrounding blocks. Those spots showed up as bright patches in the thermal images and did not match the expected smooth cooling pattern. The team could not say right away what caused those hot spots. They might mark airspaces behind the face, differences in stone type, or some hidden structural feature. What mattered for the larger project was that each pixel in those thermal images is also a number, a temperature value at a certain point on the face at a certain time. Once you have that, you can plug those numbers into the same three-dimensional model as the muon data and ask simple questions like which areas of stone heat and cool as if they are hollow behind the surface to pin down the shape of the north face corridor and other shallow features. The Scan Pyramids groups turned to tools that work at much shorter range. Ground-penetrating radar was dragged across the chevron zone and nearby areas. Each short radio pulse bounces off changes in material, and the echo times show how deep those changes are. Ultrasound sensors sent sound pulses into the stone and listened for reflections in the same way. Electrical resistivity tomography used lines of electrodes to push small currents into the masonry and the rock, then measured how easily those currents flowed, which changes when the current hits a gap or a crack. Engineers built a three-dimensional computer model of the chevron blocks and the area behind them, using detailed surface scans as a frame. Then they loaded the radar echoes, ultrasound travel times, and resistivity readings into that model, and adjusted the internal shapes until all 3 datasets agreed. This merged picture confirmed that there really is a corridor-like void behind the chevrons on the north face, and it gave better estimates of its length and slope than muon data alone could do. The same mix of methods has now moved down to the base of the pyramid. A 2025 report from the Scan Pyramids collaboration describes ground-penetrating radar, ultrasound, and resistivity tests along part of the face that looks toward the main approach. These tests found 2 small, air-filled cavities only a few feet behind the stone surface at depths of roughly just under 5 feet and just under 4 feet because they sit in the rock right in front of the monument and line up with other architectural features. The team suggested that they might be part of a hidden entrance zone. By now, the Great Pyramid and the limestone it rests on are no longer just shapes on a map. In computer memory, they exist as a dense, three-dimensional grid where each tiny block of space can hold several values at once, including estimated density from muons, how it heats and cools from thermal scans, how radar waves bounce there, how electric current flows, and how far the local gravity field bends. Once this full digital pyramid was dropped into field simulation software, some teams noticed something odd under the base, a patch in the rock where the modeled fields kept clustering instead of spreading out. To understand why that patch shows up there and why people now mention a kind of energy pattern under the Great Pyramid, you have to stop thinking of it as just stone sitting on sand and start seeing it as part of the planet's larger electric skin. The living energy pattern under the pyramid. Over the last few years, a quiet idea from physics labs has begun to gain momentum. A few researchers say the Great Pyramid does something special to invisible waves in the air. When certain kinds of radio waves wash over the stone, the energy does not just pass by and fade. It gathers in a few places, including the rock right under the base. It has been outlined that the Great Pyramid is actually a coupled oscillator, which transforms vibrations into energy, and that generates power. Watched over time, that shifting pattern starts to look like something alive. An energy pattern is simply the way invisible fields line up in space. When some scientists call a pattern living, they mean it changes when the world around it changes. The Great Pyramid sits in the middle of a constant storm of radio and other electromagnetic waves. These waves are in the same family as light, just with much longer lengths between each crest. They carry radio broadcasts and static from lightning. The stone does not make these waves. It just stands there while they pass through and around it. The surprising part is that its size, shape, and inner layout can steer a small slice of that energy into certain spots. A key look at this came from a physics study that appeared in 2018. A team based at ITMO University in St. Petersburg and a lab in Hanover turned the known size and shape of the Great Pyramid into a computer model. They filled it with average limestone, carved in the main rooms, set it on a block of rock that stood in for the plateau, and asked one question. If long radio waves roll past this object, where does the energy go? They focused on waves with lengths between about 200 and about 600 meters, which is between about 650 and about 2,000 feet. That range is much longer than the pyramid is tall. So, these waves act more like a slow tide that washes over the whole structure than like a tight beam that hits one stone. When the team let those waves strike the model from different sides, they found that most of the time the energy simply scattered. But at a few special wavelengths, the pyramid behaved like a tuned body, and certain spots lit up. Inside the stone, the model showed stronger fields in three main zones. One was around the king's chamber, another was around the queen's chamber. A third zone sat near the rough-cut chamber in the rock below the center. In these places, the field strength rose above the level in the rest of the block, which means the waves were piling up a bit there instead of just passing by. The team then looked at what happens when you let the pyramid sit on a realistic base. In a second set of runs, they placed the same stone body on top of a layer of limestone that stood in for the bedrock and watched what happened in the rock under the base. For several of the special wavelengths, the model showed that most of the scattered energy did not stay in the air above or in the outer stone. It was pushed down into the ground directly under the pyramid. When they drew field maps, the brightest knot of energy sat in the rock under the center line, roughly beneath the lower chamber. The picture also changes once you stop treating the pyramid as a smooth block and remember that it is full of details. The clean computer model used smooth stone in only the major rooms. Other work has shown that the structure has extra hollow spaces, sloping corridors, hidden gaps high above main passages, and shallow gaps in the stone just a few feet behind parts of the casing. From the point of view of radio waves, every hollow space and every sudden change in stone acts like a different material. A narrow tunnel can act like a channel that guides waves from one region to another. A damp patch in the bedrock can let some of the field sink deeper, while a drier patch nearby reflects more of it back up. The end result is that the real energy map in and under the pyramid is a bent version of the simple pattern from the first model, full of extra knots and shadows. That is where heavy computer runs and pattern-finding software come in. Once the three-dimensional model of the stone, the gaps, and the ground is in place, many different mixes of waves can be sent at it in the virtual world. Some runs stand in for distant long-range radio stations. Others stand in for short pulses from nearby transmitters. Some include more moisture in the rock, and others include less. For each case, the computer follows the same field rules and records where the energy is highest in each part of the volume. On its own, that gives a stack of frozen pictures. The real world never sits still, though the space around the pyramid is soaked with both natural and human-made radio noise. On a global scale, storms send constant lightning pulses. Each flash adds low-frequency energy to the shell between the ground and the thin, charged layer high up in the sky that we call the ionosphere. On top of that natural hum, people have added layer after layer of their own signals. Long and medium-wave radio bands carry talk and music over long paths. High-frequency bands bounce between the ionosphere and the ground to reach ships, planes, and remote stations. Measurements show that in many places, human-made radio noise is now as strong as the natural background or stronger. In other words, the pyramid spends every hour of every day sitting in a sea of waves that span a wide range of lengths and strengths. At any given moment, only a small slice of that sea will match the special wavelengths where the structure tends to concentrate energy. But because transmitters turn on and off, storms move, and space weather changes. The blend of waves in the air is never exactly the same. When that changing mix of signals hits a fixed shape that has its own favorite ways to ring, the energy map inside and under the stone shifts in time. To move from theory to something you can test, you would need sensors in and under the structure that can feel these changes. A ring of small antennas around the base and a few probes in existing shafts and rooms could listen for tiny swings in field strength over many months. Put together, the readings would form a thick bundle of data that ties the changing outside radio world to the fixed stone shape and the rock below it. This is where artificial intelligence tools come in. Standard field solvers can already predict how waves move through a known shape, but matching those predictions to real, noisy, long-term readings and finding the stable features inside the noise is hard to do by hand. In many other areas, learning-based programs already clean up messy scans of complex structures and pull out the main shapes hidden inside. The same style of tools is now being pointed at the pyramid problem. Over time, this approach could give a clear picture of the underlying field pattern as something with two sides. One side is fixed and comes from the unchanging shape and materials. The other side is in motion and comes from storms, broadcasts, and other swings in the radio environment. That mix of a stable frame and a restless signal is what turns a dry set of field plots into what is now called a living energy pattern. There is one more twist. The same 2018 study that treated the Great Pyramid as a large-scale wave-focusing body was not meant to power up old myths. It was meant to inspire tiny devices. The team pointed out that you can shrink the same pyramid shape down to the scale of dust-sized grains and use it to build small parts for solar cells and light sensors. At that size, the waves in question are not long-range radio, but visible and near-visible light. Panic, pride, and power struggles around a living pyramid. Studying the Great Pyramid of Giza as a scientific object is one thing, but the moment you start talking about living energy patterns and artificial intelligence in the same sentence as one of the world's most iconic ancient monuments, everything changes. That's when the panic begins. When scientists first announced they had detected a hidden space high inside the pyramid, the reaction outside Egypt was simple: excitement. A new discovery, a new mystery. But inside Egypt, the reaction was far more intense. Zahi Hawass, the former Minister of Antiquities and one of the most well-known archaeologists in the world, quickly dismissed the claims. He argued the discovery added nothing new, explaining that large stone structures often contain gaps. Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities supported this, emphasizing that only trained Egyptologists should interpret what truly matters inside the pyramid. But beneath these statements was something deeper. For years, Egyptian scholars have had to fight off wild theories, claims that aliens built the pyramids, or that they were ancient power plants, or that a lost civilization hid secret knowledge beneath the sand. So when this new void was announced, it didn't just sound like science, it sounded like those same old stories coming back again. Pride, frustration, fear of losing control over their own history. Then something changed. In 2023, a tiny camera was sent through a narrow gap inside the pyramid. What it revealed was real, a clean, untouched passage now known as the North Face Corridor. This time, even Hawass called it one of the most important discoveries of the century. But the bigger question didn't go away. Is the Great Pyramid just a finished monument from the past? Or is it something we can scan, analyze, and treat like a living system? That debate only grew louder when reports surfaced about unusual energy patterns beneath the pyramid. Almost instantly, old theories exploded back online. Claims that the pyramid was a machine, part of an ancient energy grid, or even connected to a hidden underground city. For many experts, this was exactly what they feared. Careful scientific data was being twisted into viral myths. What was meant to be serious research was turning into fuel for internet speculation. And in a world where one viral video can reach millions, years of real scholarship can be overshadowed overnight. The Egyptian government has had to respond again and again, issuing statements to shut down rumors from underground cities to claims of damage to the pyramid itself. In one case, even routine maintenance work was misinterpreted as destruction, because here, the stakes are real. In Egypt, history isn't just about the past. It's tied to national pride, identity, and even the economy. Saying the wrong thing about the pyramids isn't just a mistake. It can have serious consequences. And behind it all, the Giza Plateau World Heritage Site remains tightly controlled, managed, and protected. Because the truth is, this isn't just a scientific discovery anymore. It's a battle over who gets to define one of the greatest mysteries on Earth.